How might your life have been different if there was a religion for you? A religion that affirmed you as a woman, as equal to man and made in the image of God. A religion that acknowledged your menstrual cycle as a sacred part of creation. Your body and sexuality blessed and validated the feminine voice of God as the most highest, and the care and sustainability of natural resources and non-human life as the highest goal of mankind. How might your life have been different? Welcome to Heretica, her eco-feminist theology educational podcast. My name is Eleanor and I am the podcast creator. The modern revival of goddess worship. Today's educational podcast will be mostly based on a paper by Tia Nicolai called The Western Revival of Goddess Worship, published in 2022 in the journal Feminist Theology. Nicolai traces the origins of the goddess movement in modern times. This is what she has found. The goddess movement, also known as the divine feminine, arose in the 20th century through the interweaving of the women's liberation movement with female-centered spirituality. Its roots were planted in the 19th century by first-wave feminists, as we have established in previous podcasts, who explored the concept of God in the image of woman in their writings, and also reinterpreted the Bible and published the Woman's Bible. Interest in their work was rekindled in the 1960s, when second-wave feminists began to feel unsatisfied with the lack of feminine representation in religion. So they further enriched the realm of female spirituality by embracing neo-paganism. Pioneers like Budapest and Starhawk played a crucial role in shaping the goddess movement by merging Wiccan principles with feminist ideology. By doing so, they challenged the male-dominated nature of neo-paganism, reclaiming paganism and the symbol of the witch, thereby giving birth to a unique feminist occult religion. Through this process, the goddess movement evolved into a distinct religious entity, separate from neo-paganism. The witch symbol was appropriated by the women's movement and transformed into an emblem of female strength and endurance. It additionally served as a political act in the late 1960s, when the imagery of witches became central to feminist activism. As the influence of witch-centric activism expanded, it sparked a surge of interest in feminine spirituality, drawing in a diverse range of individuals, including women's rights advocates, female artists, and neo-pagans who were inspired by goddess feminism. The 1970s witnessed a significant upswing in the goddess movement's membership, transforming it into a prominent cultural phenomenon with far-reaching international impact. This movement has continued to thrive and evolve in the 21st century. So the four main characteristics of the goddess movement. First, some thoughts. The worship of Western goddesses constitutes a decentralized religious movement that shuns traditional hierarchical systems, opting instead for a more egalitarian and empowering approach. While the practices and belief systems of goddess followers may overlap, the primary focus lies in individual spiritual experiences rather than adhering to a unified doctrine. The goddess movement embraces a diverse range of spiritual beliefs, combining aspects of seemingly incompatible religious ideologies, such as the concepts of reincarnation and an afterlife, as well as the principles of non-dualism and dualism. As a result, goddess feminism has faced criticism for lacking theological consistency and coherence. In the book, Goddess as Nature Towards a Philosophical Theology, Paul Reid Bowen challenges this assumption. He contends that goddess feminists hold a coherent albeit fluid religious worldview and suggests that the lack of a set doctrine may itself represent a challenge to rigid orthodox structures. Reid Bowen therefore identifies 4 concepts that are central to the goddess movement, namely deity, femaleness, nature, and politics. So beginning with deity, the deity manifests in the goddess movement as a supreme female being, predominantly perceived as both immanent and transcendent, as a tangible mother deity, and as a psychological archetype. She materializes in countless forms and as deities of various traditions, ancient and neo-pagan goddesses, Hindu and Buddhist deities, Christian female saints, and the female spirits such as fairies, nymphs, and naiads. The most popular deities are Aphrodite and Athena from the Greek pantheon, the Egyptian Isis, Hindu goddesses Lakshmi, Saraswati, and Kali, and in Christianity, Mary Magdalene. Some also revere complementary gods along with their chosen goddesses, the most worshipped pairing being the triple goddess, that's maiden, mother, and crone, and the horned god. Practitioners often do not dedicate themselves to one deity, and instead call upon various beings in accordance with their prayer's purpose. For example, Aphrodite, bestower of beauty and passion, would be summoned for matters of love or fertility, whereas the fierce Kali would be conjured for strength and courage. Notably, the invoked goddesses do not usually belong to the same spiritual tradition and are often not of Western origin, which has garnered criticism on the basis of cultural appropriation. Deity-centered practices greatly vary from traditional Christian prayer to transgressive pagan rituals. The most widespread practices include conventional prayer, ceremonies involving the consumption of psychedelic drugs, tarot, meditation, and witchcraft. The second dominant characteristic of the goddess movement is the belief that femaleness has been historically denigrated and disfigured. Femininity is viewed as intrinsically holy, and Abrahamic religions are criticized for demonizing the female body. Goddess devotees argue that major religions value the intellect and the esoteric over the earthly plane, and furthermore associate the first qualities with men, while the latter is seen as embodied by women. For this reason, the goddess movement vastly challenges salvation-oriented religious discourse and declares that spiritual liberation is to be found in the physical plane, in the body. Moreover, goddess spirituality rejects the assumption that femininity is feeble and reveres the female body, sanctifying sexuality. Female cyclical functions such as menstruation and menopause are transformed into celebratory and sacred rituals. The goddess is often revered as the womb, and many practices are centered on womb imagery. So for me, the most important when it comes to the characteristic of the goddess movement is to be able to bring in Christ consciousness. So this is a great way to be able to combine Christianity with goddess worship without compromising religion. The third characteristic is credence to the sacredness of nature. Nature is perceived as female and as the mother goddess herself. Mother Earth, therefore, is a central goddess in the goddess movement's pantheon. A prevalent belief is that there is an intrinsic connection between women and nature, and both were subjugated out of fear of their inherent and destructive power. Noting that historically, spiritual traditions that honored nature venerated the feminine, goddess feminists call for respect for both the earth and women. The fourth and final aspect is the movement's political account. Numerous goddess followers consider the spirituality to be political and partake in feminist community service, such as voluntary work in family planning centers or political activism. Many are eco-feminists or environmental activists who revere the planet as a life-giving mother goddess and advocate for her protection. Serving as both spiritual and political feats, this religious current is reanimated in a secular age in which modernity often is associated with atheism or agnosticism. For goddess followers, modernity does not signify the rejection of divinity. It instead represents renovation and adaptation, the reconstruction of older spiritual structures in the likeness of the oppressed. So now looking at the psychological research into goddess spirituality. Why are women turning to the goddess? In her article, The Effects of Ritual Healing on Female Victims of Abuse, a study of empowerment and transformation by Janet L. Jacobs, explored the healing values of goddess spirituality and what that holds for the traumatized female psyche, by researching a group of 25 women who were subjected to acts of male violence, including sexual assault, domestic violence, incest, and psychological abuse. To begin with, Jacobs referenced psychological findings suggesting that in addition to feeling powerless, ashamed, and isolated, victimized women often felt blame and responsibility for their assault, which was the shared experience of her 25 subjects. In order to address trauma, the female participant joined a women's circle centered on goddess spirituality, in the context of which they earnestly shared their pain with each other and engaged in various rituals. The 25 women adhered to a loosely delineated goddess-centered theology in which the goddess was both a metaphysical deity and an emblem of female empowerment. Although of diverse nature, the rituals they partook in were centered on healing psychological wounds. The female victims intended to experience the goddess as themselves, and by claiming ownership of her power, they desired to conquer their grief. Examples of such practices included invoking the goddess, chanting songs of female solidarity in praise of the goddess, smashing eggs while shouting the name of one's abuser, guided meditations in which one envisioned themselves as the goddess and confronted the perpetrator from a place of strength, and writing down details of their abuse and burning the paper. As a result, the women reported an increased sense of personal power as a result of their participation in the rituals and an improved mental health outlook with respect to their victimization. They acknowledged that one of the most meaningful aspects of their spiritual practice was belonging to a community in which they could openly share their experience while also connecting with other victims. These declarations led Jacobs to argue that through feminine-centered, community-based spirituality, women relieve themselves of the burden of shame and secrecy. Moreover, she concluded that reconstructing goddess feminine provides women with a legitimate source of power in the spiritual realm that can be internalized as a personal identification with strength. By envisioning divinity as female, women do not depend on a male figure for their healing or salvation. Jacobs emphasized the significance of this by recalling that women often associate their helplessness with male violence. Thus, a masculine god would make both their abuse and recovery dependent on external male figures. A female god therefore internalizes the healing process, which becomes reliant solely on the woman's self. Jacobs deemed the integration of the feminist archetype in a woman's consciousness to be self-protective armor needed for personal transformation. The symbol of the goddess therefore becomes integrated into the consciousness of the participant, contributing to a redefinition of self as powerful rather than helpless victim. Also important to note is that the goddess movement gave rise to an explosive current in the category of self-help guides. So Christ consciousness is an awareness of a higher self, and the journey to establish one there is characterized by wisdom, unconditional love, peace, clarity, faith, trust, and kindness. And what Christ consciousness also does when we focus on it and draw it through a deity is that it shifts the gaze. So instead of looking outwards, it connects us inwards into our third eye center. And bringing this further back to Christianity, could goddess worship blend with Christian tradition? To answer this question, I will focus on the Virgin Mary. Personally, from my own research and readings, I realized that Mary actually replaced the female deity of Greco-Roman times, Artemis. To my surprise, at Mount Athos or Agion Oros, which is the greatest Orthodox monastery in Greece, and where no woman is allowed to enter, and is dedicated to the Virgin Mary, exists a plaque dedicated to the Goddess Artemis. In antiquity or pre-Christianity on Mount Athos, they worshipped the Virgin Goddess of Olympian pantheon Artemis. This indicates that they just replaced the name Artemis with Mary and crowned her as the sacred abbess of the Orthodox monastery on Mount Athos. This, of course, does bring into question the historicity of the Virgin Mary, if she did exist in human form or not, but I'm not going to go into it in this podcast, maybe at a later one. So the discovery of our pagan past in Christianity should not surprise us. In the book by Stefan Benko, The Virgin Goddess, Studies in the Pagan and Christian Roots of Mariology, there are essentially two schools of thought amongst academia, one which says that the cult of the Virgin was influenced by pagan or Greco-Roman practices, and even that it was absorbed and assimilated by some into Christianity. On the other hand, scholars believe that the cult of the Virgin Mary is something new, different from the pagan cults, because of the spirit of Jesus. So it's this Christ consciousness that I've been referencing. At this point, I'll leave you though to consider if you would include the Virgin Mary in a goddess circle, together with other deities. Or you believe she's a clearer and better representation of the feminine aspect of God, and she's in a category of her own. I personally do gravitate more towards her newness, but when I do study her, I have seen elements that are drawn from ancient Greece as being part of her legacy, like her divine birth experience and venerating motherhood, which existed in ancient goddess-based civilizations like that of Minoan Crete. So I just leave you to contemplate on the Virgin Mary, about goddess worship, Christianity, and Christ consciousness. If you believe that all these can be combined into goddess worship, or for you there's something new about them and something much more clearer that we shouldn't merge together. So thank you for listening. Until next time. How might your life have been different if there was a religion for you? A religion that affirmed you as a woman, as equal to man, and made in the image of God. How might your life have been different? Heretica, her eco-feminist theology educational podcast.